I wanted to thank everybody for joining us this evening. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Amanda Manza. I'm the Director of Alumni and Family Engagement at Moravian, also an alum from the class of 2013 and the MBA class of 2017. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Just a couple housekeeping items. If you could just keep yourself muted just during the presentation, that will cut down on any background noise. As you can see, the event is being recorded, so you can decide whether you want to keep yourself on camera, off camera. That's totally up to you. We will open the session up for question and answer, but if you have questions that pop up throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We'll keep an eye on that as well. I don't want anybody to forget their questions as we go through the presentation this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter for this evening, Dr. Sonia Aziz. Dr. Aziz is Associate Professor of Economics, specializing in environmental economics, with a focus on health economics and water resources in developing countries. Her research focuses on the valuation of health and other non-market goods by evaluating human behavior in response to potential health and environmental risks and the impact of that behavior on the outcomes experienced. She also serves as co-director of the Center for Investigation on Poverty and Inequality. Dr. Aziz, it's all yours.
Thanks very much for that nice introduction, Amanda. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you being here, especially the ones who are up in the middle of the night and joining us for this talk. So lots of thank yous for being here. And thank you to the Return and Learn program for giving me the opportunity to have a little bit of airtime with some of our alum. So I will get started because I know that I can get, I've been trying to trim it down a little bit, but I will get started and share my screen with you. And as Amanda said, please don't forget your questions because that's what I'm looking forward to. That's what I've been looking forward to all day. So let's get started. All right. So y'all might be wondering what's up with this title, right? Bringing space observations to a rural Bangladeshi village. That's kind of difficult to kind of get your mind around. So hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll have a sense of what this is and how it works. But the work that I'm doing now is sponsored by NASA's Science Mission Directorate. They have an Earth Science division, and within that division, there's an Applied Environmental Sciences program. And so my work is under the aegis of that program. The grants that I'm going to talk about two grants, just to put that in your mindset. I'm going to talk about the progression of ideas based on one grant that led into the second grant. And so I'll be highlighting two grants that I worked on. And I just want to give a shout out to my collaborators, my collaborating partners. Ali Akand is the person who works on a cholera risk model. I'll tell you more about that later. Kevin Boyle is a former advisee. Emily Lambright-Paktigian, Kevin Boyle is a former advisor, and Emily Lambright-Paktigian is a former advisee. So she is she belongs in the list of your colleagues at Moravian. SM Hanifi is a local Bangladeshi that I work with during the course of these two projects. So I'll start with the same slide that I always start with, and that's a picture of my field enumerators. So the field enumerators that are pictured here are incredibly hardworking field workers. Their backs have shouldered many a survey. You will find out during the course of the talk that our work depends a lot on our conversations with villagers in these developing countries. And so these field workers go out and spend long, hot days doing surveys of households that we are interested in. And all but one of the workers that you see here has a master's degree. The one that doesn't have a master's degree is this one. And if I have time, I'm going to talk about her a little bit more. I'll give you just a little introduction to her, just because I said she doesn't have a master's, but she has a whole lot else. In terms of the workers that have masters, they have a master's degree in either public health or in policy, and they have between 8 to 19 years of field experience. So the people you see here, Shanaz, Menaz, Nasreen, they have a whole lot of field experience, and they have master's degrees that are really well suited to this work. They make about 20,000 taka a month, or $250 a month. And so that's the context in which they live. That gives you a sense. They're in a better socioeconomic strata than the households that they survey. So that gives you a sense of how very poor the communities are that we work in. The country that you're looking at a picture of a slum in Bangladesh, and we were out on a pilot survey jaunt when I took this picture. I will say a word about the one that I highlighted at first, the one that doesn't have the degrees. She followed us around during our pilot surveys. She was a slum dweller. She was intelligent, articulate, and an absolute sponge to learn about how things worked. Anything. She just kept asking why and how do I learn this? And so I ended up hiring her to work with me on these grants, and it was great. It was great for me. She was a really great, one of my most honest workers, and they deserve, all of them. They deserve more credit, visibility, acknowledgement than they ever get. And this work would simply not happen without them. And my advisees. So another aspect of this is these are my students and advisees without whom I would never have been inspired to do this kind of work. Some of the students do this work with me directly because I got onto these grants a little bit later on in my career. I think some of these students are in the audience, so I've got to be careful. I've got my Earth Sciences Economic Cabinet of decision makers here, so I know they're going to be keeping an eye on me. So Nate Ferraro is my longest standing student. I believe he's in the audience. I don't even properly remember where he is now, but he'll let us know in the chat. And he is one of the people that are here in the middle of the night. Emily Lambright-Pektigian was also an early on advisee, and she hopped on to the Bangladesh project earlier than most. So Emily ended up going to grad school at Duke. Nate ended up going to grad school at Virginia Tech. Hannah Hook ended up going up to grad school at Tufts. Nathaniel Rhodes ended up going to grad school at Columbia, and Lowell Perkins decided that he wanted to teach at a primary school level. And so they've all sort of found their ways, and their experiences in working with me on developing country applications is something that I absolutely treasure. And like I said, the work simply would not happen without them. And I mean that in a completely heartfelt way. In one way, it is just the fuel that puts me forward, the students that I have, what I'm able to bring to them, they give me back in full force, and it's a completely amazing experience. And it's also true in a really significant real way, because you'll notice that Emily Lambright-Pektigian is one of the co-PIs that is listed on this grant, on this research project. So I ended up working with her and writing grants with her for this NASA work. So it's important for me to just acknowledge the backs of the people that I shouldered this work on. They've been so important to me in terms of promoting this work and going forward with the kind of research that I've been able to do here, that I cannot not mention them when I talk about my work. I will start with a sort of a broad overview on what this is about. So what you see there is a diverse constellation of satellites. NASA maintains this pretty diverse constellation, sponsors research in developing satellite data applications across a very wide spectrum of areas. These include environmental health, infectious disease, air quality standards, and most recently, the most funded types of applications have been the impact of climate change on health and air quality in a number of interrelated efforts. That type of funding obviously changes depending on the kind of administration that we have running the US. And so while we've had a little bit of trouble getting funding over the last 10 years, we are hopeful that we'll have plenty of funding in the upcoming, I hope, century. The health and air quality and water quality area is focusing on a number of topics in this budget year and next. We are in a pretty small group of people that are looking at Earth observations and using them for Earth. It's called a mission to Earth. Some of our colleagues in this small group, we have about 10 people that are being funded at the moment. Some of our colleagues are either at UC Berkeley or Duke. So we are really happy to be involved in this effort that NASA has going on their mission to Earth. What you see here, all these pictures, I'm not going to go through all of it, but basically NASA hopes that it can take the results of the Earth sciences research and feed them into societal needs. And that's really what I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to be talking about the types of things that we can take from NASA Earth observations and use in order to support decision-making, whether it's in the public arena or in the public health policy arena. So there are an array of issues that NASA is interested in us working on. The issue that they're interested in me working on is water quality in Bangladesh. So let me give you just a little bit of background about this country. It's one of the countries in the subcontinent. And one of the things you might know about it is that it's very, very poor. It is also one of the countries that are regularly plagued by monsoons and floods, which exacerbates water quality contamination issues. Generally, water quality affects almost 2 billion people in the world. And there are millions of cholera cases every year across these 69 endemic countries. The surveillance is limited or it's underreported. Only about 5 to 10% of active cholera cases are reported worldwide. So I wonder if you couldn't take a second and think about why that is. So why would the surveillance be limited? Or even if there is surveillance, why would it be underreported in these developing countries? So just take a second to think, and I'll stop for 30 seconds. Just take a second to think about why these cases are underreported. While they're thinking, Amanda, I'm just going to do a quick gut check. Is everything going okay? Can you hear me?
We're all good. Thank you, Sonia.
All right, good. Okay, so I'll circle back to that question on why this is underreported. So 66 million people are estimated to be at risk of getting cholera in Bangladesh because of many different kinds of large-scale processes, which I'll talk about in a minute. I know this is all sounding like, what does this have to do with economics? I'm an environmental economist. I work on economics. So what does this have to do with economics? Hopefully that connection will be clear in just a couple of slides. There's a research organization called ICDDRB that maintains a whole lot of data on cholera cases in urban and rural Bangladesh. And we have used them heavily. You'll see that their name means International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research in Bangladesh. And if I have former students in the crowd, I know they're going to be proud of me for my use of technology, because I now use this wonderful screen sharing with my iPad, and I love my iPad pencil. So we have some data that we can get from places like ICDDRB, but the WHO will acknowledge that that data is an underestimate. All that is to say that cholera is a disease that has significant impact. We don't know the degree of that impact. Let me talk about what that disease is for a minute. So cholera is a bacterial disease. It causes uncontrollable loss of body fluids through diarrhea and vomiting, and it hits you fast. If it's untreated, people with cholera can die in less than 24 hours. I've seen it happen in 8. So the fluid drains from their bodies. The infection operates through a powerful toxin that causes your intestinal tract to secrete and not absorb body fluids. That means that even if you drink a bunch of water, even if I drank 5 gallons of water and I have cholera, it's going to pass right through me. The body doesn't absorb it. And so Vibrio cholera can kill you very fast. It can survive in the open ocean for months to years. It makes the jump to infect humans only when conditions become just right for the cholera bacteria to reach the drinking water supply. And unfortunately, in Bangladesh, if you look at the water supply here, you'll see that there's lots of green. And green usually means good, but it doesn't in this case. We'll talk about why in just a minute. So there are a lot of cholera cases. The cholera cases that result in mortality or morbidity is reduced over the past several years because of the advent of some oral rehydration solutions that have helped the population come back from the brink of death because they get cholera, but the cost estimates associated with current cholera cases is pretty large. So I'll talk just a little bit about the advent of something called the oral rehydration solution. Bangladesh actually discovered this solution. You guys, when you get dehydrated, you'll say water. But when you're really dehydrated, that is when you have cholera, water doesn't help you. And so I'm sure you guys have other fluids that you like to drink when you're doing athletics, like Gatorade. I like to call it Haterade because I hate the taste, but it's a really good drink. It has a perfect mix of electrolytes and allows the body to absorb that liquid. Gatorade is too expensive in Bangladesh. And so the country has come up with a discovery of a really inexpensive mix of sugar and salt and molasses. Mortality rates from cholera have plummeted since then, but its prevention remains a barrier to most of the people that are at risk. There are a lot of health and environmental risks that people have to respond to, and cholera is one of them. So it's important to try to understand how these things can be potentially prevented with state-of-the-art advancements in technology. So let me get on to that mysterious question of what satellites and space have to do with all of this. First off, let me just say that cholera is the world's longest running pandemic. It's been around for a long time. It is not going away. The thinking about the best way to attack it in the 70s and the 80s was to take a look at the environmental conditions for survival of the organism that contribute to the spread and use that data to develop ways to avert outbreak. So this disease-causing organism, Vibrio cholera, survives and thrives in the environment. This was a discovery that was made in the late 70s. That indicates higher levels of algae that cholera spreading copepods feed on. That means that you can't necessarily see the organism with the naked eye. Like if I was drinking a glass of water and there was cholera, Vibrio cholera in it, I wouldn't be able to see it. It's a microorganism. Or if I was observing a body of water, I wouldn't necessarily be able to see it. But NASA can see it from space. So what you're seeing here is you see the greens, yellows, and the reds. These indicate higher levels of chlorophyll, which indicate higher levels of the algae that these copepods feed on. And what happens when we observe these things is NASA is able to track those colors. If they can track those colors, they can track where the Vibrio cholera is going. And so the basically the outcome is this global Vibrio growth model. It's a population model for these little annoying organisms that cause such problems. And that global Vibrio risk model allows the public, the general public, and the health professions to be aware of the suitable habitat of Vibrio species, whether it's along the coast or whether it's within the country. So from the health management and planning perspectives, these model results are extremely important. So we take observations from the NASA satellites and try to feed that into a way to organize our thoughts on what the value of that is. So when I was approached to write a proposal for this project, it was very competitive. When I was approached to write a proposal, they said, we need someone who has expertise in drinking water quality to give us what the dollar value is of using these Earth observations. What's the point of having these prediction systems or Earth observations if we're not going to use them? Policymakers always need dollar values to move forward on things. And so my job was to calculate the benefits of, there's a typo here, prediction aided prevention. So the model is actually really simple. It says that we look at the savings from the outcomes that you get when you try to avert or avoid cholera, when you just do a blanket prevention effort, protect the entire population, and look at the difference between those savings versus the savings from outcomes that you avert in a targeted population. So if you think of it like this, if you think of a vaccine, and you have to protect a population of 160 million people, which is about the population we're talking about here, this kind of work can say, don't protect all the people, just protect the people that are part of these cholera vibrio pathways. So maybe you get vaccines for 20 million and not 160 million. So it's a very crude estimate of savings from outcomes that you get when you avert in blanket prevention efforts versus targeted prevention efforts. The goal that I went for was focused on trying to figure out whether households value cholera avoidance. How do they behave when they experience cholera in their drinking water? And then is it useful to them to have satellite observations? Is it useful to them to have data that would support their decision-making to try to optimize how they can use that information and protect themselves and their families from this deadly disease? So basically, the merit of the idea was to integrate the prediction framework, the cholera risk model, with the economic model. So the part that I really contributed to was trying to figure out how to use household values of avoidance to try to inform a prediction framework. And the results of this informs decision-making both for public health policymakers and for the general public. What this relies on is a lot of contact between us and the private households that are taking these mitigation actions. So the pictures that you're seeing here, this is a little island of floating slums that move constantly around Dhaka City. The reason they move constantly is because the governments would often light a match to these slums and try to get these people out of these areas so that they can control the population. Also, these households, so one of these units is a house, it's like a room, and they float above this level of contamination. If you look real close, you might find a shoe or a suitcase in there, but there certainly is E. coli or bacterial contamination in there. And so these populations are highly susceptible to the risks that they face in the water that surrounds them. The object of our game here was to try to figure out whether households were willing to mitigate cholera, try to figure out their willingness to pay to avert it, or willingness to do. Sometimes households will walk really far to go get safe water, and that has an important monetary magnitude that economists like to count. And so we observe their current mitigation practices, and then we try to figure out what kind of factors affect their choices on trying to avoid this deadly risk. So when we complete the study, we find a few things. So again, we're trying to look at preferences for avoiding cholera. We use ongoing water collection usage practices and willingness to pay with satellite data and without satellite data. So an advance warning is something that you get from satellite data. The satellite data gives you about 2 weeks of advance warning, and you can act in response to that advance warning. What we found was that more than 90% of the sample that we interviewed indicated preferences on changing water collection or hygiene habits based on the satellite information. And respondents show an increase in willingness to pay for a proxy cholera averting vaccine. I could have taken anything. Oh, I see there's a double of this. Another typo. I was actually working on this until 6:45. Amanda can attest to me joining in like really late. So more than 90% say that they indicate preferences on changing the water collection or hygiene habits. And respondents show an increase for the willingness to pay for averting cholera or other key averting measures if they have an advance warning system. The things that affect this willingness to pay are a household's education, their income level, and if they've had a prior cholera experience. There's a higher valuation for prevention when there are kids that they have that are at greater epidemic risk. And the female head of the households are among the more significant indicators affecting household willingness to pay. Family size and age significantly reduce the willingness to pay. So if you have a really big family, they're going to say, we can't afford this. And if you are older, you're going to say, I don't value risk as much as I did when I was younger. While we observe the proclivity to avert, people are more likely to use averting measures other than the vaccine. I would like to acknowledge my students' work in all of this. So through their honors thesis, Lowell Perkins, Hannah Hook, Nathaniel Rhodes, Emily Paktigian have all worked on water quality issues in particularly in Bangladesh with respect to cholera. So the work that I did on that first, so here we find specific things that we think would be important to target if we want to optimize the uptake of these early warning systems. Female head of households was really important. Leveraging female voices are really important. The change makers and the gatekeepers for health in these societies are often overlooked and undervalued. In terms of continuing research, I had ideas to try to customize the early warning dissemination strategies so that NASA's satellite-based early warning system could be efficiently used by the at-risk population. And I really wanted to work on this thing called field experiments or randomized control trials. You might be familiar with randomized control trials with respect to pharmaceutical drug trials, where you give a certain number of the population the actual treatment, and the other group, you don't give them any treatment, and you look at the differences. This is actually a big move in development economics. It's a new method in development economics where we use natural experiments where people in their environments give them different stimuli and see how they respond to the different stimuli. And what that does is it actually makes economics really improve our knowledge and understanding of how people make the decisions that they do. It reveals it gives us a better understanding of the revealed and stated preferences that they portray. It gives us a window into how the poor make the decisions that they do. And it allows us to kind of forecast how we could sustain use of satellite information. So the ideas that I had got me a second grant, and the problem in the previous one was that there's a real high prevalence of cholera, but there's a limited preventative response, even though the directions that we saw of people wanting to protect themselves were positive. So we wanted to figure out how better understanding affects the household averting decisions that are made. The main information that we ended up providing was the prediction of the cholera risk that we get from the satellites. We use a remote sensing model with these satellite data inputs, and we stick that into a cell phone application. And the guiding questions on that cell phone app are households receptive to this information through a cell phone app? We want to do a randomized study design so that we can compare whether the households with more information are more receptive than the households that are in a control group where they receive no information. Second, do households change their averting behaviors in response to the risk information? Again, it's a randomized study design, and the comparison across the treatment arm and the control arm allows us to identify the value that's associated with these modeled cholera predictions. Once we have the value of this, we can say, what did we actually end up avoiding? How much are we able to help the country in terms of a reduction in hospital costs and treatment costs if we're able to use this information? So our idea was to use the cholera prediction model calibrated with the sensors and observations that we had, incorporate population vulnerability estimates with it. And the idea was to basically improve the space-time resolution of warnings. What we found was the main challenge is not in getting the cholera prediction model to work. The main challenge is in communicating cholera risk with the appropriate information. So at this point, Amanda, I'd like to turn it over to myself and share what the app looks like. So folks, so far we've said, okay, satellite observations may help us with getting predictions of cholera outbreak, etc. The next task is to provide that information to a rural Bangladeshi villager. That kind of thing can be a little tricky. How do you provide really granular risk information? And so I'd like to show you the app that we developed that speaks to the Bangladeshi villagers. So the current project that I'm working on is in developing this app and disseminating the app across a wide range of respondents in a village in Bangladesh and figuring out how they value this information. So I will share my screen. I hope this works. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. So my team ended up developing, I'm gonna do this again. My team ended up developing an estimate of cholera risk that goes into this app. And this first message that you see, well, the very first message customizes the risk and says hello to whoever the app belongs to. So we have a personalized message greeting the villager. And then we say, we realize that literacy rates may be low in these areas. And so we try to use colors, like you see this green color of the houses in the background. And the green color is paired with some writing that says that this is a good color. I have low cholera risk. And obviously this person is getting the information from the phone that is communicating with the satellite. If you click on learn more, so there's an aspirational message here that says, I would like a village like this. I would like a village that has low cholera. When you click on learn more about your own cholera risk, the title of this slide says, my cholera risk. And can you guys see the little house in the corner? It's in the upper left-hand side. That's because we're not in the study area. We're drowning out in the ocean somewhere. But if you are part of the study population, your house would be placed in the study area and you would be picking up a color. It would be one of three colors. We found that a more granular explanation of risk does no good. People don't understand it, they get irritated by it. But high level of risk, medium level of risk, low level of risk works. So you place it, the model places the house where you are and tells you what your level of risk is, whether it's red, high, yellow, medium, low, green. When you click on learn more, this gives you a sense of the R naught, or the transmission rate. If you are in red, you have a fairly high transmission rate. And so the message that goes with this is pretty frightening. It says that my cholera risk is the highest it can be. The risk of getting, or the fear of getting cholera is deadly. So that's what the red message says. If you got placed in the yellow zone, you would get a different kind of transmission rate and a different kind of message. If you click on learn more, you find out that if you want to save yourself, the message in the bubble on the top says, if you want to save yourself from this high level of risk, here are the mitigation measures that you can take. So it includes boiling water, practicing safe hygiene practices when you go to the bathroom, washing your hands with soap and water, washing your vegetables before you eat and before you cook, and taking oral rehydration salts. And so that's it in a nutshell. It's a very simple little model. The artwork was developed by I'm very proud to say this, the graphic artist. If you'll see in this note, the graphic artist is Anna Latovsky, and she is one of my students. So let me see, I'm going to go back to the top, exit. Well, actually, I'm going to come back to screen broadcasting. What do I need to do, Amanda, to get off this train from my phone?
Oh, you did it.
Okay, excellent. Now, am I back?
Your camera's off, but you're back. Yes, there you go.
Okay, so I'm going to share screen again, start broadcast just to finish this out. Just a couple more slides, hang in there. This is like a lecture. Okay. All right, so the main challenge was to communicate cholera risk with the appropriate information, and that's what the app does. So we take the app to try to figure out, are the households receptive to information about cholera risk that's given to you through a cell phone app? We use a randomized study design, and we compare the control group and the treatment group. We also ask, do households adjust their averting behaviors in response to the cholera risk information? Again, we're using the randomized study design, and the comparison across the treatment and the control arm allows us to identify the value associated with the modeled predictions. End of the day, we get a sense of what the value is of the damages avoided. This is a much more granular and better approach to trying to figure out what the value of satellite observations is than when I first started. When I first started, it was just an accounting exercise. What's the savings with blanketed prevention? What's the savings with prediction-aided prevention? Obviously, we're going to get a cost savings there, but that work allowed me to build in to what we could really ask in the next grant, which is compare the costs across the treatment arm and the control arm. In a nutshell, the types of things that NASA is funding, whether it's cholera or something else, is they want to know what the value is of satellite data. And they would like to know that in a pretty rigorous experimental format. They want to see us going through this very complex quantitative modeling to try to figure out how the information that they can provide about any kind of risk using satellite prediction can affect decision makers and their choices. Look at whether it makes a difference, whether you have the improved information or not, and then try to figure out whether these can be sustained outcomes for people in the environment. Now, this particular application is really, it's limited right now to a small area, a small rural village in Bangladesh. We actually did start the project in the capital of Bangladesh, which is an urban area, urban slums, but it's this rural area in Bangladesh is, the model has worked really well, is what I can say so far. I can't give you an estimate of the avoided damages because we're not done with the work yet. We're still collecting the data, but preliminary analysis seems to indicate that we've got some good results here that we can talk about in some publications, and that can potentially be used for the end user population. I know that a lot of this is quite a bit of hand waving. I haven't gone through every detail that I've presented in any of the slides. And so I would really love to hear from people, get some questions, and get a discussion going, if that's okay. So, questions?
You all can feel free to submit questions in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and ask them directly to Dr. Aziz.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Blair Yasso, a graduate of Moravian. That was really fascinating. I appreciate all that information. I'm curious, when do you anticipate having more definitive so-called final data from the second grant?
December of this year, and hopefully shooting for publicizing the results in January.
That's great. What do you expect the greatest challenge to be in sort of disseminating that information to the public at large, the funders of the research? Right. So one of the challenges that we've gone through in just pushing this work forward is that NASA is an organization, and organizations like to talk to other organizations. And a big push that I've made here is to try to get to the household level so that the household can get the information and use it, and then there's a value there. Unfortunately, and there might be a lot of, there may be some nuanced truth to this that I'm not willing to admit yet, but unfortunately, it may be the case that, the Bangladesh government says that, these households deal with these cholera risks every year. They've done it for decades. It's fine. Let them have it. Let it rip. And so one of the problems that I foreseen in getting the information across to policymakers so that it reaches the household is that organizations like NASA want to talk to other research organizations that will then disseminate the information. And we're actually going straight to the households to do it. That's a really great question. That's a challenge that I think is coming in disseminating the info. Thank you. Good luck. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments before we wrap up for the night?
Yeah, I got one. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Dr. Aziz.
Hey, Nate.
I just got a quick question on for kind of using this technology long term. Is there the possibility of kind of more static maps that could be utilized in places that might not have as good internet? Because I know in some places it can be a little, or to pair it with flood warning systems where water might flow into areas.
Yeah, that's a really struggled with that issue when we went into the design of the project, because I didn't have enough money to, first of all, I just wanted, as a scientist, I wasn't really thinking about sustained use. I was really just thinking about, well, if this was something that was accessible to the population, would they use it? And so I thought, just give them the instrument, figure out whether there's a value there, like buy them all cell phones, figure out whether there's a value in just them getting the improved information. Didn't have the money for that. That's just so nice to be able to control for all of these variability across cell phones. I had to rely on a market analysis of what kind of cell phones people used and the prevalence of cell phones in that area. That area seems to be pretty rife with cell phone usage. And this kind of goes back to the work that Esther Duflo and Banerjee have done on poor economics, seeing how, trying to resolve the conundrum between people who are really poor, but they have a TV, people who are really poor, but they have these smartphones. There are all these issues that, I think about when it comes to this. It turns out that this population had a very high penetration of cell phones in that area. We did a little market analysis before we went into it, of course. And the lowest cost of a clone Chinese Android is $40. The highest cost in this population is $73. And we found in this population, even if they don't have enough money to get the next meal on the table, the household will have at least one cell phone. And that's a question, that's like an open question that I think will take years to answer. Why do people do that? One of the sort of low-hanging fruit in terms of answering that question is people want access. They want to have a portal into the world, even if they're like remote and away and poor. They want to have a portal into how they can improve their lives. Cell phones are one way to do that. But that's a pretty deep and mysterious question. We managed to avert it during the study. But if we plan to scale it up, Nate, which we do, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that issue. In this study, we dealt with it simply by taking into account the minimum level of cell phones people had. We designed the app with a really tiny data footprint, and we gave them all data packages so that they could use them. But that doesn't get away from the question that you asked, which is ownership of a smartphone.
Perfect. Thanks. I know always more fires like that. When you fix one thing, another fire pops up.
And that's the fun, right, Nate? We chase fires around the world.
Something like that. Something like that.
Something like that.
All right, I don't see any other questions. If anything were ever to pop up, feel free to send those either to me or directly to Dr. Aziz, but we can always get them to her if you're thinking about these later on, or if you rewatch the recording and you have questions, feel free to send those to all of us. So I wanted to take a moment just to thank Dr. Aziz for being here with us tonight and presenting. We really appreciate it. It's some incredible information and work that you're doing. So we are excited to see where it goes when you kind of finish up this study with the second grant. So we'll keep in touch and give everybody an update as we get to that part of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So this is actually our last return and learn for the semester, but we will be back in January, and we have about one a month planned from January through May. So definitely look back into those, and we'll send out some emails as well as to what the topics are going to be, as well as who our presenters are. So I hope that you all will join us in the springtime. But thanks for joining us tonight, and we will see you at another time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.